The darkness of space lit up without a sound as the human colony ship New Horizons broke into 1,000 pieces. Metal panels and frozen chunks of debris floated away in every direction, spreading across the star system like snow falling in slow motion. The ship had been carrying over 300 souls to a new world, families hoping for a fresh start among the stars. Now it was nothing but wreckage and silence. But in that field of destruction, something moved with purpose. Scorith, an elder dragon whose scales had turned silver with age, glided through the vacuum as easily as a fish through water. His kind didn't need ships or suits to travel between the stars. They were born to the void, their bodies naturally generating the plasma fields that protected them from radiation and the killing cold. Scorith had been alive for over 4,000 years. He'd watched entire civilizations bloom and wither like flowers in fast forward. The sight of another failed human venture didn't surprise him. What did catch his attention was a small object tumbling end over end through the debris field. A cryopod, the kind humans used to keep their fragile bodies alive during long journeys. Most of the pods he could see were dark, their systems dead along with whoever had been inside. But this one was different. Its status lights blinked steadily, and as Scorith drew closer, he could hear the faint pulse of its life support system. The dragon extended one massive claw and carefully steadied the spinning pod. Through the frosted viewing port, he could make out a small shape. An infant. A human baby girl, probably no more than a few months old. Her eyes were squeezed shut and her mouth was wide open in a cry that the vacuum couldn't carry. Even through the pod's insulation, Scorith could see her tiny fists shaking with rage and fear. Foolish creatures, Scorith thought, broadcasting the words through the telepathic web that connected all dragons across vast distances. Always pushing too far, too fast. Never content with what you have. Another dragon's thoughts reached back to him almost instantly. Vexira, one of the Elder Council members, her mental voice sharp with disapproval. Leave it, Scorith. Human affairs are not our concern. They destroy themselves with predictable regularity. This changes nothing. But Scorith couldn't look away from that crying infant. There was something about the defiance in her expression, the sheer stubborn refusal to give up even when surrounded by death. She was so small. His smallest claw was larger than her entire body. One wrong move and he could crush her without meaning to. Yet she kept fighting, kept crying, kept demanding to live. The pod's power won't last more than a few hours, Scorith observed, studying the readouts on the cryo unit's exterior display. After that, she'll freeze or suffocate. Then that is her fate, Vexira replied coldly. We do not interfere. We made that choice 3,000 years ago, Scorith. You were there. You voted for isolation along with the rest of us. Scorith remembered that vote. Remembered the wars they'd tried to stop, the peace treaties they'd brokered, the countless times they'd intervened in galactic affairs only to watch everything fall apart again. The younger races were too impulsive, too driven by emotion and short-term thinking. Dragons had finally agreed that the only way to maintain their own peace was to withdraw completely, to let the galaxy sort itself out without their involvement. That had been the wise choice. The logical choice. So why were his claws already wrapping gently around the cryopod, securing it against his chest as he turned toward his homeworld? Scorith, what are you doing? Vexira's mental voice took on a warning tone. Something unwise, Scorith admitted. Something illogical. Perhaps something I'll regret. But I cannot leave her to die. Not when I have the power to save her. If you take that human child to Pyraxis, you take full responsibility for it. The Conclave will not help you. We will not change our laws or customs to accommodate a creature that will be dead in less than a century anyway. I understand. She is my burden alone. Scorith could feel Vexira's disapproval like ice along their telepathic connection, but she didn't argue further. Dragons valued individual choice, even when they disagreed with it. He would be allowed to keep the human infant. He would also be allowed to fail, and the Conclave would not save him from the consequences. The journey back to Pyraxis took 3 days, even at the speeds dragons could achieve in open space. Scorith kept the cryopod pressed against his chest the entire time, using his own body heat to supplement its failing power systems. Through the viewing port, he watched the infant sleep and wake, cry and sleep again. He'd never felt more aware of how fragile life could be. Pyraxis appeared before him like a jewel against the black. The dragon homeworld was unlike anything in human space. Mountains floated freely in the atmosphere, held aloft by ancient technology and natural magnetic fields. Crystalline caves sang with harmonic frequencies when the wind blew through them. The air itself shimmered with barely visible energy, the accumulated power of thousands of dragons living in harmony with their world. Scoreth descended to his personal domain, a mountain that had been his home for the last 2 millennia. The entrance to his cave system was large enough to accommodate his full wingspan, and inside, the crystals that grew naturally from the walls provided all the light and warmth anyone could need. He set the cryopod down carefully on a flat section of floor and studied the controls. Human technology was primitive compared to what dragons could create, but it was clever in its own way. The pod had kept the infant alive through the catastrophic destruction of her ship. That deserved respect. With delicate precision that seemed impossible for such massive claws, Scoreth opened the pod seal. Atmosphere hissed as pressure equalized. The infant's eyes snapped open, and for a moment, dragon and human stared at each other. Then she started crying again, louder this time, her whole body shaking with the effort. Scoreth felt a wave of panic. He'd studied 1,000 civilizations, decoded languages that had been dead for millions of years, negotiated treaties between species that couldn't even see the same spectrum of light. But he had absolutely no idea what to do with a crying human baby. There now, he rumbled in dragon tongue, his voice like distant thunder. "You're safe. You're alive. That's something, isn't it?" The infant kept crying. Of course she did. She couldn't understand him. She was cold, hungry, scared, and surrounded by the strange. Everything she'd known was gone. Scoreth carefully lifted her from the pod, cradling her in his foreclaw. She was so warm compared to the vacuum of space, her heart beating frantically fast. Dragons' hearts beat once every few minutes. Hers fluttered like a tiny drum, pumping life through her at speeds that seemed exhausting just to consider. "I'll call you Kira," Scoreth decided, the name forming in his mind without conscious thought. In dragon tongue, it meant little flame. She certainly had fire in her, this screaming scrap of humanity. "Welcome to Pyraxis, Kira. Welcome to your new home." The infant, Kira, gradually stopped crying, worn out by her own efforts. She stared up at the massive dragon holding her, her tiny hand reaching out to touch one of his silver scales. For a moment, everything was quiet except for the harmonic singing of the crystals. Scoreth looked down at the human child he'd saved and wondered if he'd just made the greatest mistake of his very long life. Or perhaps, just perhaps, the most important decision. Only time would tell. Kira turned 16 on a day she'd never forget, though not for reasons anyone would celebrate. She stood at the edge of the Great Assembly Hall, a massive cavern carved into the heart of Pyraxis where young dragons gathered to train and socialize. The ceiling stretched so high above that clouds sometimes formed inside, and the walls were lined with crystals that pulsed with soft light, responding to the dragon's natural energy fields. She watched a group of young dragons practicing their aerial formations, and the sight was both beautiful and heartbreaking. They moved through the air like dancers in perfect synchronization, their bodies twisting and rolling in patterns that seemed impossible. Fire and plasma trailed behind them in ribbons of color, purples and blues and brilliant whites. But what made it truly seamless was something Kira couldn't see or hear. The telepathic communication that flowed between them like an invisible current, allowing them to coordinate without a single spoken word. Kira had been trying to tap into that telepathic network for 10 years. She'd meditated for hours, focused until her head ached, even built devices that she hoped might amplify whatever brain signals the dragons used. Nothing worked. The silence in her mind was absolute. She was surrounded by a constant conversation she would never be part of, like being the only deaf person at a concert. A shadow passed overhead, and Kira looked up to see Ash descending toward her. The young dragon was only 300 years old, practically a teenager by dragon standards, and had been Kira's closest friend since childhood. Ash's scales were a deep bronze color that caught the light beautifully, and when the dragon landed beside Kira, those massive wings folded with practiced ease, barely disturbing the air. "You've got that look again," Ash said, lowering one enormous head to Kira's level. The dragon's voice rumbled through the stone floor, a sound Kira felt in her bones as much as heard with her ears. "What look?" Kira asked, though she knew exactly what Ash meant. "The brooding look. The one where you stare at us flying and get all quiet and sad." Ash's golden eyes studied her with concern. "You're thinking too much again." "I'm not brooding," Kira protested, crossing her arms. "I'm just observing. Processing. Thinking about aerodynamic efficiency and formation patterns." "Right. That's what you always say when you're brooding." Ash settled onto the ground, curling that long tail around to create a sort of semicircle around Kira. It was a protective gesture, one the dragon had been doing since they were both much younger. "Talk to me. What's wrong?" Kira sighed and sat down on a nearby rock formation, suddenly tired. "How do you do it? The telepathy thing. I've been trying since I was 6 years old, Ash. A decade of trying, and I can't even sense a whisper of what you all are saying to each other. Ash was quiet for a moment, and Kira knew the dragon was choosing words carefully. Kira, you're asking your body to do something it wasn't designed for. It's like asking a fish to breathe air, or asking me to survive without my wings. Your brain just isn't wired the same way ours are. So I'm broken, Kira said flatly. No, Ash said firmly, and there was heat in the dragon's voice now, literal heat that made the air shimmer. Don't ever say that. You're not broken, you're just different. You're human. That's not a flaw. Isn't it though? Kira gestured at herself, at her small frame that barely reached Ash's knee. Look at me. I can't fly without building a machine. I can't survive in vacuum without a suit that takes me an hour to put on. I can't breathe fire. I can't talk to any of you without using my voice like some kind of primitive creature. I can't even eat the same food you do. I'm surrounded by beings who can cross star systems with just their bodies, and I need life support just to survive another day. You can build, Ash interrupted, and the dragon's voice was gentle now. Kira, do you have any idea how rare that is among our kind? Do you know how many dragons have created something genuinely new in the last 1,000 years? Kira shrugged. I don't know. A lot. 3, Ash said. 3 dragons, out of thousands, have invented anything original in the last millennium. We don't innovate anymore. We don't experiment or try new things. We just exist, doing the same things we've done for ages. But you? You're 16 years old and you've already built 19 different flying machines. 18, Kira corrected automatically. The Mark 7 doesn't count because it exploded on the launch pad before I even got in it. My point exactly, Ash said, and if dragons could smile, Kira would swear Ash was doing it now. You built something, it failed spectacularly, and what did you do? You studied the failure, figured out what went wrong, and built something better. That's not dragon thinking. We'd just accept that we can't do something and move on. But you humans, you see an obstacle and you find a way around it, through it, or over it. You don't accept limits. Kira picked up a small crystal fragment from the ground, turning it over in her hands. That just sounds like I'm too stubborn to know when I'm beaten. It sounds like you're remarkable, Ash corrected. And I'm not the only one who thinks so. The younger dragons talk about you all the time. They're amazed by what you build, by how you solve problems. You think you're less than us because you can't do what we do naturally, but Kira, we can't do what you do either. And honestly, what you do is more impressive. How is building gadgets more impressive than being able to survive naked in space? Because we were born able to do that. We didn't earn it or work for it. But everything you've accomplished, you've had to fight for. Every machine you've built, every problem you've solved, every day you've survived in a world that wasn't made for your species. That takes courage and intelligence and determination that most dragons will never understand because we've never had to struggle like that. Kira felt her eyes getting hot, that telltale prickling that meant tears were coming. She hated crying. It was such a human thing, such a weak thing. Dragons didn't cry. Their emotions burned as fire or radiated as heat, but they didn't leak water from their eyes like broken plumbing. I just want to fit in, Kira said quietly. Is that so wrong? I want to be part of the conversation instead of always on the outside. I want to fly without needing a machine. I want to belong here, truly belong, not just be the weird human that Scoreth took pity on. Ash's tail curled closer, the tip coming to rest gently against Kira's back. The scales were warm, comforting. You do belong here. You're my best friend. You're Scoreth's daughter. You're part of this world whether you were born to it or not. And maybe you're not fully dragon, but you're not fully human anymore either. You're something in between, something new. That's not a bad thing, Kira. That's actually pretty incredible. Before Kira could respond, she felt a familiar vibration through the stone floor. All the dragons in the assembly hall suddenly turned their heads in the same direction, responding to some telepathic summons Kira couldn't hear. It was like watching a flock of birds all take flight at once, moving in perfect unison to a signal that was invisible to her. What is it? Kira asked, standing up quickly. Ash's expression shifted, becoming serious. The conclave. Emergency session. Something's happened, something important. Kira felt her stomach drop. The conclave only called emergency sessions for major events. The last one had been 8 years ago when a rogue asteroid threatened one of Pyraxis's sister moons. Can I come? Ash's expression became pained. You know the rules, Kira. Humans aren't allowed in the conclave chambers. I'm sorry. I'm not just human, Kira argued, hearing the desperation in her own voice and hating it. I'm Scoritha's daughter. I've lived here my entire life. I should have a right to. To the elders, you're a guest, Ash said gently. An honored guest, but still just a guest. Not a citizen, not a dragon. I don't make the rules, and I don't agree with them, but they are what they are. The young dragon started to spread those massive wings, preparing to take flight. I'll tell you everything afterward, I promise. Every detail. Kira watched Ash launch into the air, joining the stream of dragons flowing toward the heart chamber deep in the mountain's core. Within moments, she was alone in the great assembly hall, surrounded by technology she'd built herself but belonging to a society that would never fully accept her. She was turning to leave, fighting back the frustrated tears, when she heard something that made her freeze. A sound so faint that none of the dragons would have noticed it because they didn't rely on hearing the way she did. A rhythmic beeping, artificial and regular. Electronic. A signal. Kira's sadness evaporated, replaced instantly by curiosity. She followed the sound through the corridors, her human ears guiding her to a section of the mountain she didn't visit often. This was where Scorith kept his collection of salvaged debris from various spacecraft wrecks, pieces of technology from a dozen different civilizations. He'd been letting Kira use parts from this collection for years, encouraging her building projects. But this was something new. Fresh salvage. And it was transmitting. Kira was 22 when she discovered the truth that would change everything. She'd been digging through old dragon archives for months, searching for any information about the New Horizons disaster that had killed her birth parents. What she found instead was something far more terrifying. The archives were stored in the deepest levels of Pyraxis, in chambers so old that the crystals had turned black with age. Most dragons avoided this place. The memories stored here were painful ones, records of failures and wars and decisions the elders would rather forget. But Kira had always been curious, and Scorith had given her permission to access the historical databases years ago. She sat cross-legged on the floor with a portable terminal she'd built, scrolling through files that hadn't been opened in thousands of years. The dragon language had become second nature to her now, even if she couldn't speak it telepathically. She could read their written records as easily as any native. Then she found a file marked with symbols that made her blood run cold. The swarm. The consuming tide. The end of voices. The document was over 5,000 years old, but as Kira read, her hands started shaking. The swarm wasn't just some ancient myth or exaggerated legend. It was real. It had been real. A biomechanical horror that had swept across entire sectors of the galaxy, consuming everything in its path. Not just destroying civilizations, but absorbing them, turning living beings and their technology into more of itself. The dragons had fought it. They'd been younger then, more willing to engage with the wider galaxy. They'd led a coalition of species against the swarm in a war that lasted 300 years. And they'd won, barely, at a cost so terrible that the surviving dragons had voted to withdraw from galactic affairs entirely. The swarm had been driven back to the dark spaces between galaxies and left there, dormant. The dragons had decided that if they stayed isolated, stayed quiet, maybe it would never wake again. And they'd made sure that all records of the war were buried, erased from every database they could reach. Better that the younger species forget, they'd reasoned. Better that no one go looking for something best left sleeping. Kira sat in the darkness, reading about worlds consumed, species extinct, entire star systems converted into writhing masses of corrupted flesh and twisted metal. The descriptions made her sick. But what made her feel worse was the final entry in the file. We have won, but only because the swarm was still young, still learning. If it ever returns, if it has time to evolve and adapt, no force in this galaxy will be able to stop it. Our only hope is that it never wakes. Our only strategy is silence and isolation. May future generations forgive us for choosing survival over vigilance. Kira copied the files to her personal storage and returned to the surface levels, her mind racing. The swarm was the reason her colony ship had been destroyed. The New Horizons hadn't suffered a mechanical failure or hit an asteroid. It had encountered something that shouldn't exist anymore, something that was supposed to be dormant and forgotten. Which meant the swarm was back. She needed to tell someone. She needed to warn people. But who would listen to her? Over the next few weeks, Kira monitored every communication frequency she could access. She'd built a network of sensors over the years, small devices hidden throughout Pyraxis's orbital space that let her keep track of ship movements and transmissions. It was how she stayed connected to the wider galaxy despite the dragon's isolation. What she saw confirmed her worst fears. Ships were disappearing. Not many at first, just a few scout vessels here and there. An exploration ship from the Centauri Alliance went silent near the edge of their territory. A mining operation stopped responding to hails. A coalition patrol simply vanished without sending any distress signal. The pattern was subtle, easy to dismiss as normal space travel hazards. Pirates, mechanical failures, accidents. But Kira had read the historical accounts. She knew what the early stages of a swarm incursion looked like. Small disappearances at the edges of inhabited space, always in areas where people wouldn't notice right away. The swarm was smart. It had learned from its last defeat. This time it was being careful, building its strength in secret before revealing itself. Kira took her evidence to Scoreth first. She showed him the ancient files, the current disappearances, the mathematical model she'd built that predicted where the swarm would strike next. Her adoptive father listened carefully, his ancient eyes growing darker as she spoke. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "I remember the war," Scoreth finally said, his voice heavy with old pain. "I was young then, barely 1,000 years old. I watched friends die. I watched entire worlds burn. The screaming, even without telepathy, you could hear the screaming as the swarm consumed people. It didn't kill them quickly, Kira. It kept them alive while it transformed them, used their terror and pain as fuel for its growth." "Then you believe me," Kira said, relief flooding through her. "You'll help me convince the Conclave to act." But Scoreth shook his massive head. "The Conclave chose isolation for a reason. If we engage with the galaxy again, if we go to war again, we risk everything we've built here. Our peace, our culture, our very way of life. What about everyone else's lives?" Kira demanded. "What about the billions of people who don't even know this thing exists? They can't fight what they don't understand. They'll be slaughtered." "That is the choice we made," Scoreth said quietly. "To save ourselves by withdrawing. I do not expect you to understand, little flame. You have human instincts, human values. You want to help, to fight, to save everyone. But we dragons have lived long enough to know that some fights cannot be won, and some prices are too high to pay." Kira felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. "So you'll just let it happen? You'll hide here while the galaxy burns?" "We will survive," Scoreth said. "As we always have. I am sorry, Kira. I know this is not the answer you wanted." Kira left that meeting feeling more alone than she had since childhood. If the dragons wouldn't help, she'd have to convince the coalition species instead. She sent out messages on every channel she could access, encrypted transmissions describing the threat and begging someone to investigate. Most of her messages were ignored. A few got responses ranging from polite dismissal to outright mockery. One coalition captain wrote back saying that dragon legends weren't credible intelligence, and maybe Kira had been living in isolation so long she'd started believing fairy tales. Then she got a response that gave her hope. Captain Reynolds of the Pathfinder, the same officer she'd met years ago, agreed to meet with her. He brought Commander Martinez and a team of military analysts. Kira showed them everything she had, every piece of evidence, every historical record. They believed the historical accounts were real. How could they not, with dragon records as proof? But they didn't believe the swarm had returned. "A few disappearing ships doesn't prove anything," Reynolds said, though his expression was sympathetic. "Space is dangerous. We lose vessels all the time to various causes. Pirates, mechanical failures, spatial anomalies. Without physical evidence of this swarm, we can't justify mobilizing a military response." "By the time you have physical evidence, it'll be too late," Kira argued. "That's how it works. It stays hidden until it's strong enough to attack in force. Then suddenly it's everywhere at once, and you can't stop it." "We understand your concern," Martinez said. "And we'll increase patrols in the affected areas. We'll investigate the disappearances more thoroughly. But Kira, you have to understand our position. We can't tell our people that an ancient dragon legend has come back to life based on circumstantial evidence. There would be panic." "There should be panic," Kira said. "Panic might actually save lives if it makes people prepare." But she could see in their faces that they'd already made up their minds. They would investigate, sure. They would file reports and increase patrols. But they wouldn't treat this as the existential threat it actually was. Kira returned to Pyraxis feeling defeated. The dragons wouldn't fight because they'd chosen isolation. The coalition wouldn't fight because they didn't believe the threat was real. And she was just one person, a human woman with no army, no authority, no power to make anyone listen. She stood in her workshop, surrounded by the machines and devices she'd built over the years. Tools and weapons and vehicles, each one a small victory over her own limitations. She'd spent her whole life adapting, finding ways to survive in a world not built for her species. Building solutions to problems everyone else said were impossible. Maybe it was time to build a solution to this problem too. If the dragons wouldn't fight and the coalition wouldn't mobilize, then Kira would have to create a force that could stand against the swarm. She'd need a ship, a crew, weapons that combine dragon technology with human innovation. She'd need to prove the threat was real in a way no one could deny. She'd need to become something neither fully dragon nor fully human, but something new. Something dangerous. Something the swarm wouldn't expect. Kira pulled up her design software and started sketching. She had access to dragon materials, salvage technology from a dozen species, and 22 years of experience building the impossible. It was time to build her masterpiece. Time to forge a weapon that could save a galaxy that didn't even know it needed saving. The Ashwing would fly, whether anyone believed in it or not. The swarm didn't announce itself with diplomacy or warnings. It simply appeared one day and started consuming everything in its path. The border colonies went first, small settlements on the edge of explored space where help was days away even at maximum speed. By the time coalition forces arrived to investigate, there was nothing left but twisted metal and organic matter fused together in ways that made even hardened soldiers sick. Kira watched the reports coming in from her workshop on Pyraxis, and her heart sank with each new update. 3 colonies gone in a week. Then 7 more. Then an entire system, 2 billion people, just gone. Converted into more swarm biomass, their ships and stations and bodies all absorbed into the growing horror. The coalition scrambled to respond, throwing everything they had at the advancing threat. Fleets that had been designed to fight other fleets, using tactics developed for ship-to-ship combat. They might as well have been throwing rocks at a tsunami. The swarm didn't fight like an army. It fought like a plague, spreading and adapting and overwhelming through sheer relentless growth. Species that had been political rivals for generations suddenly found themselves facing extinction together. The Centauri Alliance and the Outer Rim Confederation had been on the brink of war just months ago, arguing over mining rights and trade routes. Now they were dying side by side, their fleets shredded by swarm vessels that looked like nightmares made real, all chitinous armor and biocannons that fired living ammunition. Kira knew she had to act. The Ashwing was ready, though barely tested. She'd spent 8 months building it in secret, using a hidden canyon far from the main dragon settlements. The ship was unlike anything else in the galaxy, a seamless fusion of dragon metallurgy and human engineering. Its hull was forged from the same materials dragons used to protect their bodies in space, nearly indestructible. Its weapons were plasma cannons that mimicked dragon fire but amplified through human-designed focusing arrays. Its engines combined the best of both worlds, efficient and powerful. But a ship was just metal and circuits without a crew. Kira needed people, and finding them proved harder than building the ship itself. Her first recruit was Captain David Chen, though that name meant nothing anymore. He'd been dishonorably discharged from the Coalition Navy after refusing an order he considered immoral. The official record said he was a coward. The truth was he'd refused to abandon a disabled civilian transport to save his own ship. He'd stayed and fought off pirates until rescue arrived, but in doing so he'd disobeyed direct orders. The Coalition didn't forgive that kind of insubordination, no matter how noble the cause. Kira found him working as a cargo hauler on a rundown station, drinking away his bitterness. "I'm building something to fight the swarm," she told him bluntly. "I need someone who knows fleet tactics and isn't afraid to break rules." Chen looked at her with bloodshot eyes. "The swarm can't be fought. Coalition's throwing everything at it and barely slowing it down. That's because they are fighting it the wrong way. Like it's just another enemy fleet." Kira pulled up holographic displays showing the Ashwing's design. "I'm not building another Coalition warship. I'm building something new. Something that combines technologies in ways no one's tried before." Chen studied the schematics, and she watched his expression slowly change from skepticism to cautious interest. "This is Dragon Tech. How did you get access to Dragon Tech?" "I was raised by them. Long story." Kira met his gaze steadily. "Look, I know your record. I know what they say about you. I also know what actually happened. You sacrificed your career to save civilians. That tells me you're exactly the kind of person I need." "What you need is a miracle," Chen said. But he was still looking at the ship designs, and Kira could see the old fire starting to kindle in his eyes. One ship against the swarm? That's suicide. One ship to prove it can be done, Kira corrected. To show everyone that we don't have to just roll over and die. To give people hope that there's actually a way to fight back. Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then he downed the rest of his drink and stood up. When do we leave? Her second recruit came from an unexpected place. Ash arrived at her workshop one night, landing quietly to avoid alerting the conclave. I'm coming with you, the young dragon announced. You can't, Kira said immediately. The conclave forbids it. You'd be exiled. I know. I don't care. Ash's eyes burned with determination. I've watched you prepare for this fight, Kira. I've seen you work yourself to exhaustion building that ship. You're doing what the rest of us are too afraid to do, and I won't let you do it alone. Besides, you'll need someone who can actually breathe fire when your fancy plasma cannons run out of ammunition. Kira felt tears threatening. Ash, this could get you killed. Or worse, cast out from the only home you've ever known. You're my home, Ash said simply. Where you go, I go. We've been friends since we were children. I'm not abandoning you now. Word spread quickly among the younger dragons. If Ash was going, others wanted to volunteer too. Within a week, Kira had 5 dragons willing to defy the conclave, all of them barely past their second century, practically children by dragon standards. They were the ones who'd grown up watching Kira build and innovate, who'd been inspired by her refusal to accept limitations. The conclave was furious. They called an emergency session and demanded Scorith bring Kira before them to answer for corrupting dragon youth with her recklessness. Kira stood in the heart chamber, tiny and human among beings that had lived for millennia. Elder Vexera's voice boomed with barely contained rage. You dare recruit our children for your suicide mission? You dare lead them away from safety into certain death? I'm not leading anyone anywhere, Kira said, keeping her voice steady despite her fear. They volunteered. They chose this, just like I chose it. And it's not a suicide mission. It's the only mission that matters. The swarm is coming, whether you acknowledge it or not. We survived the swarm once by withdrawing, another elder interjected. We will survive it again the same way. You'll survive, Kira agreed. Here on Pyraxis, hidden away while the rest of the galaxy burns. While billions die screaming. While entire civilizations are erased. You'll survive, and you'll have to live with the knowledge that you could have helped but chose not to. Better to live with guilt than die with pride, Vexera snapped. Is it? Kira looked around the chamber at all the ancient faces. You've lived so long that you've forgotten what it means to fight for something beyond yourselves. You've become so focused on survival that you've stopped actually living. My species might be short-lived and impulsive, but at least we understand that some things are worth dying for. Enough, Scoritha's voice cut through the chamber, and every dragon fell silent. Her adoptive father stepped forward, his ancient scales gleaming in the crystal light. The girl speaks truth, however uncomfortable it may be. We made our choice 5,000 years ago, and perhaps it was the right choice then. But the galaxy has changed. The swarm has evolved. And we cannot simply close our eyes and hope it passes us by. You would support this madness. Vexera turned on Scorith with betrayal in her eyes. You, who voted for isolation along with the rest of us. I would support my daughter, Scorith said quietly. And I would support the young dragons who have found something worth fighting for. We have spent millennia existing. Perhaps it is time we remembered how to live. The conclave erupted in argument, telepathic voices clashing in waves Kira couldn't hear but could feel in the vibrations of the stone around her. When the chaos finally settled, the eldest spoke, his crystalline voice heavy with sorrow. Scorith, if you continue to support this endeavor, you will be exiled from Pyraxis. You will be stripped of your status as elder. You will be cast out, forbidden to return. Scorith bowed his head. I understand. No, Kira whispered. Don't do this. Don't sacrifice everything for me. Little flame, Scorith said gently, you are not taking me from my home. You are giving me a reason to remember why home was worth protecting in the first place. 3 days later, the Ashwing launched from Pyraxis with a crew of 7 humans, 6 dragons, and 1 very determined hybrid ship. Kira had picked her target carefully, a small swarm advance force that had just consumed a mining colony. Not large enough to be impossible, but significant enough that victory would mean something. The battle was brutal. The swarm ships moved with organic fluidity, their hulls regenerating damage almost as fast as the Ashwing could inflict it. But Kira had studied the ancient war records. She knew the swarm's weaknesses, the ways it could be hurt that other commanders hadn't tried. Dragon fire, it turned out, didn't just burn. It disrupted the biomechanical bonds that held swarm tissue together. And when that fire was channeled through human-designed weapons, amplified and focused, it became devastatingly effective. The Ashwing tore through the swarm formation like a blade through rotted cloth. Dragons flew alongside the ship in vacuum, breathing plasma that carved glowing wounds into enemy vessels. Chen coordinated the attack with precision born from years of combat experience, calling out targets and managing their limited ammunition. And Kira, at the helm of her hybrid creation, felt something she'd never experienced before. She was flying not with a machine, but as part of one. The Ashwing responded to her thoughts almost like telepathy, its systems so integrated with her control interface that ship and pilot became one unified force. They won. Not easily, not without damage, but they won. And Kira made sure every second was recorded and broadcast across every coalition channel she could access. The galaxy watched a human woman and a crew of misfits do what entire fleets had failed to accomplish. They watched dragons and humans fighting together, their strengths complementing each other perfectly. They watched the impossible become real. And slowly, grudgingly, they started to believe. The reconnaissance drones found it 3 months after Kira's first victory against the swarm. Deep in uncharted space, hidden in a nebula that scrambled most sensors, the drones detected something that made every scientist who saw the readings go pale. The Nexus. The heart of the swarm. A structure so massive it defied comprehension, a worldship the size of a small moon that was actively consuming and converting 3 nearby star systems into more of itself. Kira stood in the command center of Unity Station, the hastily constructed headquarters where Coalition and Dragon forces had been coordinating for the past months. The holographic display showed the Nexus in all its horrifying detail. Organic towers miles high pulsed with bioluminescent light. Mechanical tendrils stretched across thousands of kilometers, mining asteroids and dead planets for raw materials. And at its core, barely visible through the mass of tissue and metal, something that looked almost like a brain, a central intelligence coordinating the entire swarm across dozens of star systems. We're looking at the single largest concentration of swarm biomass in known space, Commander Martinez said, her voice tight. Conservative estimates put its mass at 2.3 trillion tons and growing exponentially. At current consumption rates, it'll have processed those 3 systems completely within 6 months. After that, it'll be strong enough to launch a full-scale invasion of core Coalition space. So we hit it now, Captain Chen said. Before it gets any stronger. With what? Admiral Ross, the Coalition's supreme military commander, gestured at the tactical displays showing their available forces. We've gathered the largest fleet in galactic history. 62 capital ships, 300 support vessels, and 18 dragons willing to fight alongside us. Against that. He pointed at the Nexus. Our combined firepower might not even scratch it. Then we don't try to destroy it with firepower alone, Kira said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. She stepped forward, pulling up new data on the holographic display. The Nexus is the swarm's brain. Everything else, all the individual ships and forces, they're just extensions of it. They operate on distributed intelligence, but the core processing happens here. If we destroy the Nexus, the entire swarm loses coordination. The individual pieces will still be dangerous, but they'll be manageable. Destroy it how? Ross asked skeptically. Would need to penetrate its defenses, fight through who knows how many swarm vessels protecting it, and deliver enough explosive force to crack something the size of a moon. We don't have weapons that powerful. Yes, we do. Kira pulled up specifications for a device that made several of the military officers step back in shock. Quantum resonance warhead enhanced with dragon plasma. It doesn't just explode. It destabilizes matter at the molecular level, creating a chain reaction. One bomb, placed at the exact center of the Nexus, would tear it apart from the inside out. That's a doomsday weapon, Martinez breathed. Kira, where did you even get the specifications for something like that? I built it. Kira met their stares calmly. Over the past 2 months. I had help from some very talented engineers and a few dragons who understood the plasma dynamics better than I did. It's ready. It works. I've tested the components individually. The problem, Scoreth rumbled from where he rested near the back of the command center, is delivery. That device must be placed precisely at the Nexus core. Any deviation and the chain reaction will fizzle out before destroying the structure. And the core is protected by layers of swarm tissue and defenses that will actively try to destroy anything approaching. Which means whoever delivers it won't be coming back, Ross said flatly. You're talking about a suicide mission. The room fell silent. Kira had known this moment would come. She'd known it since she first designed the weapon. Someone would have to fly into the heart of the Nexus, into the densest concentration of swarm forces in existence, and manually placed the warhead. The radiation and interference made remote detonation impossible. It required a living pilot to navigate the chaos, and that pilot would die when the bomb went off. "I'll do it," Scoreth said, his voice carrying the weight of 4,000 years of life. "I have lived long enough. This is a worthy end." "No," Kira said immediately. You're not dying for my plan. Someone must, little flame. Better it be me than someone with a full life ahead of them. Better it be someone who actually designed the weapon and knows exactly where it needs to go," Kira counted. She pulled up more specifications, these ones showing modifications she'd made to the Ashwing. "I've been preparing for this. I knew what would be required. The Ashwing has been upgraded with shielding that can survive the Nexus interior for approximately 11 minutes. That's enough time to reach the core, place the device, and arm it. But not enough time to get out," Chen said, his voice rough with emotion. He'd been her second-in-command for months now, had become a friend. "Kira, you can't." "I can, and I will." Kira looked around the room at all the faces, human and dragon alike. "This is what I was meant to do. I'm the bridge between your species. The human raised by dragons. I understand both your technologies, both your ways of thinking. No one else can pilot that ship the way I can." "There has to be another way," Ash protested, the young dragon's distress visible in the flickering of flames around clenched teeth. "There isn't. And we're running out of time." Kira called up the countdown display showing the Nexus's consumption rate. "Every day we wait, it gets stronger. We have one chance at this, one opportunity to hit it before it becomes truly unstoppable. We can't waste that chance because we're afraid of the cost." The argument raged for hours. Dozens of alternatives were proposed and shot down. Remote piloting wouldn't work through the interference. Another pilot couldn't navigate the Ashwing as well as Kira could. Conventional weapons couldn't penetrate deep enough. Every option led back to the same conclusion. Kira, in the Ashwing, delivering the quantum warhead personally. Finally, Admiral Ross made the decision. "We proceed with the plan. But Kira, if you find any way to survive this, any way at all, you take it. That's an order." "Yes, sir," Kira said, though they both knew it was a lie. There would be no survival. She'd made her peace with that. The fleet assembled over the next week. Ships from every coalition species, retrofitted with dragon technology, formed the largest armada anyone had ever seen. Dragons flew in formation with fighter squadrons, their natural abilities enhanced by human-designed amplification fields. The Ashwing took point, Kira at its helm, with Scoreth and Ash flying escort beside her. The journey to the Nexus took 3 days at maximum speed. 3 days for Kira to say goodbye to everyone she'd come to care about. Chen, who'd become like an older brother. Martinez, who taught her so much about leadership. The young dragons who'd risked everything to follow her vision. And Scoreth, her father in every way that mattered. "I'm proud of you, little flame," Scoreth said during their last private conversation. "I found you as a crying infant in the wreckage of your world, and you've grown into someone who might just save the galaxy. Your birth parents would be proud too, wherever they are." "I wish I could have known them," Kira said quietly. "You carry their best qualities. Their courage, their determination, their refusal to surrender in the face of impossible odds. That is legacy enough." The battle began at 0600 hours, Galactic Standard Time. The fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel and immediately came under assault from swarm forces. Thousands of biomechanical ships swarmed out from the Nexus like angry insects, their weapons tearing into Coalition shields. But this time, the Coalition was ready. This time, they had dragonfire and hybrid technology and tactics that actually worked against the swarm. Ships that would have been destroyed in earlier battles now held their ground, their dragon-forged hulls shrugging off attacks that should have been lethal. Kira didn't watch the wider battle. Her eyes were fixed on the Nexus, on the narrow window of opportunity that Chen and Ross were creating with their fleet maneuvers. The Ashwing accelerated, its hybrid engines pushing beyond safety limits, racing toward the massive structure. Swarm vessels moved to intercept, but Scoreth and Ash were there, breathing plasma that carved glowing wounds through enemy hulls. More dragons joined them, a dozen young volunteers who'd rather die fighting than live in hiding. They formed a living shield around the Ashwing, sacrificing themselves to clear Kira's path. The Nexus exterior loomed ahead, a wall of writhing organic material and twisted metal. Kira found the opening she'd identified in the reconnaissance data, a ventilation shaft or feeding tube or whatever the swarm used. She didn't hesitate. The Ashwing plunged into the darkness. Inside the Nexus was hell. Organic matter pulsed around her ship, trying to seal the wound her passage created. Bioweapons fired from growths in the walls. The air, if it could be called that, was thick with spores and corrupted nanomachines. Kira's shields flared constantly, burning away the infection that tried to consume her ship. But she'd studied the maps. She knew where the core was. The Ashwing twisted through passages that seemed designed to trap intruders, following her instincts and instruments in equal measure. 10 minutes gone. 1 minute remaining before her shields failed completely. The core chamber opened before her, vast and terrible. The swarm's brain, a massive structure of crystallized thought and organic computing power, pulsed with sickly light. This was it. The heart of the enemy. The source of all the horror. Kira armed the quantum warhead and set it to detonate in 90 seconds. She launched it toward the core with the Ashwing's last functional missile system and watched it embed itself deep in the swarm tissue. Then she tried to escape. She turned the ship and pushed the engines to maximum, racing back through the passages she'd mapped. 60 seconds. Her shields were failing, red warnings flashing across every display. 45 seconds. The Nexus was fighting back, trying to seal her inside, recognizing the threat. 30 seconds. She wouldn't make it. She'd known she wouldn't, but she'd had to try. Kira thought of Scorith, of Ash, of all the people she'd come to love. She thought of the billions who would live because of what she'd done here. She thought of her birth parents, who'd put her in that cryopod hoping she might survive when they couldn't. I hope I made you proud, she whispered. 15 seconds. Then something impossible happened. Through the walls of the Nexus, through the layers of corrupted tissue and twisted metal, Kira felt something she'd never experienced before. A voice in her mind. No, dozens of voices. Hundreds. Every dragon in the fleet outside, their telepathic powers combined and focused with desperate intensity. We will not let you die alone. Energy flooded into the Ashwing, into Kira herself. Dragon fire, channeled through technology and biology and sheer force of will. She'd spent her whole life unable to touch the telepathic network, forever an outsider. But now, when it mattered most, the dragons weren't trying to let her in. They were bringing their power to her. The Ashwing shields flared brilliant gold, powered not by engines but by living will. The ship shot forward with impossible speed, bursting from the Nexus exterior just as the quantum warhead detonated. The explosion was silent in vacuum but devastating in scope. The chain reaction spread through the Nexus like lightning through water, destabilizing its molecular bonds, tearing apart the careful structure the swarm had built over millennia. The massive world ship came apart in slow motion, pieces the size of mountains breaking off and dissolving into their component atoms. And throughout the galaxy, swarm forces suddenly stopped coordinating. Ships that had moved with perfect synchronization now drifted aimlessly. The invasion stalled, then crumbled, as coalition forces realized their enemy had lost its guiding intelligence. Kira woke in the medical bay of Unity Station 3 days later. Scorith was there, of course, his ancient face showing more emotion than she'd ever seen. "You're alive," he said simply, and his voice cracked with something that might have been tears if dragons could cry. "How?" Kira's throat was raw, her body ached, but she was definitely alive. "We all felt it," Ash explained, the young dragon's voice full of wonder. "When you were trapped inside, when we knew you were dying, every dragon in the fleet reached out at once. We didn't plan it, didn't coordinate it. We just all did it simultaneously. And somehow, our combined strength was enough. Enough to shield you, to give your ship the power it needed to escape. You're the first human to ever experience dragon telepathy," Martinez added from the doorway. "The readings were off the charts. Technically, you should be brain dead from that much psychic energy, but apparently being raised by dragons gave you some kind of resistance. Or compatibility. We're still trying to figure it out." Kira looked at her hands, flexing fingers that felt somehow different. Changed. Did I really channel dragon fire? In those last moments, I could feel it. Like I was breathing plasma myself. "You did," Scorith confirmed. "Through technology and through will, you became what you always were meant to be. Not human, not dragon, but a bridge between both. Something new. Something that saved us all." The war wasn't over. Scattered swarm forces remained throughout the galaxy, dangerous but manageable without the Nexus coordinating them. But the existential threat was gone, broken by a human woman who'd refused to accept the limitations of her biology or the isolation of her adopted people. 6 months later, Kira stood before the reformed Galactic Council. Dragons sat alongside representatives from dozens of species, species that had been strangers or rivals now working together to rebuild what the swarm had destroyed. The isolationist age was over. A new era of cooperation had begun, born from the desperate fight for survival. They offered Kira titles, honors, positions of power. She refused them all. She wasn't interested in politics or glory. She was interested in building, in creating, in continuing to bridge the gaps between species who'd spent too long apart. She returned to Pyraxis with Scoreth and Ash, back to the workshop where she'd built her first flying machine as a child. But now young dragons and humans came to learn from her, to study how different technologies and philosophies could combine to create something greater than either alone. Kira had been abandoned in space as an infant, the sole survivor of a disaster that should have killed her. She'd been raised by beings so different from herself that she'd spent years feeling like she'd never truly belong anywhere. But in the end, she'd discovered that being caught between two worlds didn't make her incomplete. It made her exactly what the galaxy needed. A reminder that differences weren't weaknesses to overcome but strengths to celebrate. That cooperation wasn't just idealistic thinking but practical survival. She was Kira. Human and dragon raised. Builder and warrior. The woman who'd learned to fly when everyone said it was impossible, and who'd saved a galaxy by refusing to accept that some bridges couldn't be built. And every night, when she looked up at the stars from her workshop, she thought of her birth parents who'd given her life, and Scoreth who'd given her a home, and all the people from 100 worlds who'd given her a purpose. She'd found her place in the universe. Not human, not dragon, but something beautifully, impossibly both.